Yeah, when Wes invited me to give this presentation, he said, there's probably a lot of people who maybe have heard of the maker movement or of making, but maybe are a little bit unsure about what that means, if it's something exclusive that you don't have access to, what keys do you need in order to be a part of the maker movement. So I'm going to give this kind of overview presentation to help explain what it is, what it means, and how you can be involved. And I have a clicker. Wes has already told you a little bit about who I am. But let me add to that a little bit. What I think is important for you guys to know is that I'm not an engineer. I graduated from State College with an English degree, thinking I might be maybe a teacher, but hopefully like a writer, something more lucrative than what my parents figured I could probably do with my English degree. But I came into making really as someone who was curious to make stuff, not professionally, but because I thought there was a lot of cool stuff out there that I wanted, and the way to get it was to make it, especially if you were broke like I was out of college. I'm not talking to you as some kind of professional or engineer who can't relate to the experience of being outside of the world of picking up a soldering iron or working in a wood shop. I was totally an outsider coming into this. There's room for everybody. Also, I didn't grow up particularly handy. Maybe some of you can relate to that too. I grew up, my single mom raised me, and we had one toolbox that was about as big as this book, and in it had like a hammer and a few screwdrivers, and that was about it. But now I'm pretty tool obsessed, but it took me a while to come around to that version of myself. All right, so what is a maker? That's the big question here. Maybe I can answer it right out of the gate. We can all go home, but I have a lot of other slides to show too. A maker is a deliberately ambiguous, all-encompassing term that can frustrate a lot of people, and it's a fuzzy term. But it more or less just means someone who is excited about making something. And I think the way that you need to frame that is to think about the fact that there's no reason you need to make anything anymore. In the sense that we've now made it possible that anything you want, you can go out and buy. The experiment of consumerism has been a wild success, and we have it now available to us to go out and buy anything we want. And yet, people enjoy making things still. We can now look at the idea of how we want to spend time making things that we want to have, not just out of necessity or because it's a means to a career in manufacturing, but what kind of things might we make if we simply want to have them in our lives. Another way to think about this is cooking. You could live a perfectly full, happy life without ever having made yourself or anyone else in your family a meal. How sad that would be, but we live at a time now where that's really possible. And frankly, probably I've come across more people than I thought who actually have had that experience where they are not, until their mid-20s before they actually figure out how to cook. It's weird. So I won't go down that aside. But still, people have found it pleasurable to figure out how to cook meals for themselves and for their loved ones, and it is a great pleasure that we avail ourselves to, not because we have to sometimes, but because we want to, because cooking is a pleasurable thing. I feel like making objects for yourself and in the world is one of these things that, like cooking, very recently we have a new window onto what that means in our lives. So that sounds simple, right? You have an experience of you see a thing in the world that you want to make, and then you go out and make it. We're all makers. We always have the capacity to do it, and no one else has a bigger claim on calling themselves a maker than anyone else. If your grandma is into pickling, she is in some ways a maker as much as you, as a mechanical engineer, might call yourselves a maker. And so I want to make that clear. It's a point that Dale Doherty, my former boss and writer of this book, which I recommend, he often says this is kind of his mantra, is that we're all makers. Making is something that is absolutely ancient as part of what it is to be a human being, right? Making tools, making things we need, making things we want. Sometimes we come to making from different directions. Maybe it's a work of art. Maybe we're often inspired to make something as a school project. That's a big one that I see a lot. But everyone in this room, I'm sure, has taken part of some hands-on experience, creative experience, to make a thing. And yet we don't all describe ourselves as makers, but you should take it on you now to describe yourself as a maker if that's something you want to do, because you have every right to take on that title. The only thing I would say about making is that it's a meritocracy. It's a meritocracy of creativity. As long as you're actually creating something, and whatever, if it's crafts or if it's sculpture, if it's coding, an application, whatever it is, as long as you're doing something and you're contributing something to the world, I think you have a claim to call yourself a maker. Also, one other point on making is that it is, in some ways, a counterpoint to consumerism. I talked about that a little bit in this idea that we don't have to make anything anymore, but we choose to. I feel like there is this idea I knew I grew up with, which was that my mom feeling like if I was going to be a successful, if she was doing a successful job raising me as a human being, I probably wouldn't need to make anything. I could buy whatever I needed in life. But there is something to the satisfaction of putting your hands to something and creating, and hopefully you guys have that in your lives as well. And for me, honestly, my own experience with making is actually an extension, oftentimes, of my consumer instincts. There are things as just a person who wants cool stuff in his life, I often make the things that I want to have. Sometimes because I can't afford them, sometimes because they don't exist for me to buy. And there has been a space that has been carved out of the world of making that is absolutely filling those little niches of areas where there's one famous example is arcade cabinets. A big project I've seen people take on oftentimes is making an arcade cabinet that's got every probably legally downloaded game that you could ever want available to them in their living room. No one's going to make that for them for many reasons, but you can go in and make your own, and the instructions to do so are available in many different places. Let's give an example. R2-D2. If you want to make your own fully life-size R2-D2 to spec for the film, and many people have, you can go out and make your own. You can't buy one. And if you could buy one, he's not your R2-D2. Don't let anyone tell you he is. Because the R2-D2 you want is the one that you have built. And there is a collective called the Astromech R2-D2 Builders Group, and there's actually different versions of them in different areas around the world. But there's also an online community where people share schematics, they share experiences, they share material ideas, because there's all these people, for whatever reason, have been struck and become obsessed with this idea of making their own R2-D2. It's a thing. And they'll share ideas, they'll do group builds on one guy who knows how to make the aluminum domes that are common to every R2-D2. They'll do a big batch and they'll group together the money and they'll go and manufacture them and ship them around. They'll make custom computer boards to control the animations of the lights of the different parts of the R2-D2. It's an amazing group. And there's versions of this idea of obsessives who want to make this a thing that go into model train building. They go into people who want to make their own hovercrafts, people who want to make their own boats, people who have something. And this is an important point too, is that a lot of these groups have been around for a while and predate this idea of the word maker. But what's happening, interestingly, right now is that there's two forces that have come together. One is what is the democratization of education, right? This idea that you can go out more easily than ever and read up on something that something that is outside of your skill set. The other thing is this democratization of inexpensive technology. And they're both coming together right now in a way that is more accessible than ever to anybody. And they're leading to things like this and other projects coming together more easily without having to leave your home or go to take a college course or spend years learning mechanical engineering or electronics in order to pull them off. I'll come back around to that idea a couple of times, I'm sure. Entrepreneurs, maker entrepreneurs. Here's two examples. There are many. I've seen many cases where someone who had a table at a maker fair to show off some prototype, some passion project, later spun this idea off into an entire business for themselves and sometimes an entire industry. I can think of drones, I can think of 3D printers, different tools, different projects, kick-started ideas to businesses or entire industries. This is Limor Fried of a company called Adafruit. She is the founder and kind of chief engineer of a Brooklyn-based company that is a parts supplier for all kinds of electronic components, but also she makes with her team a bunch of interesting do-it-yourself projects and kits and things that are very popular within the maker community. Over here is Lisa Fetterman. She designed a inexpensive immersion cooker, a sous vide cooker called the Nomiku, and it started off its life as a project that she showed off at Maker Faire, and then later became a Kickstarted project that is now her full-time gig, and is kind of defined in this beginning of the home immersion cooker market, which was a market that just didn't exist before that. But she was obsessed with this idea of having her own sous vide cooker, and as someone outside of electronics had no previous experience with making things or programming anything, took that passion and went out and collected the knowledge she needed to try to make her own. And she's created a business out of this. We're all amateurs. Every maker, although there are many professionals that consider themselves makers, amateur is a word that comes from the Latin word of love. People who have a passion for what they are doing, regardless of it being something that makes them money or not. This is Adam Savage dressed up in his own custom-built Ghostbusters costume that he, painstakingly went through every little detail of the proton pack and the right outfit to have and the right goggles and everything, because he just loved this idea of having his own full replica Ghostbusters costume. And that is something that I feel like when you go to a Maker Faire, and I'll talk about Maker Faire soon, that you see in everyone there presenting their project. There is maybe a crazy obsessive drive to have an idea that they really want to have in the world and exist, and to see it through to completion. It's a great feeling, and I hope it's a feeling everyone in this room gets to have in their life. It's also, I have the slide here to acknowledge that there's a lot of people that are in this maker movement that are outside of engineering: cosplayers, costume designers, people who make small houses in their backyard, blacksmiths, furniture designers, biohackers, custom car builders. The umbrella of this maker term is something that is sometimes infuriatingly large and encompasses a lot of different things. But the common thing is that they've all been affected by a desire to make a thing that they want to see in the world and then go out and do it. Which doesn't seem like too crazy a thing, but the reason we can do this now so easily is because of this democratization of information and of education that I'll talk about probably next. Almost. Up until now, you might think that I'm just a crazy person who's just been talking about a maker movement that might not actually exist in the world, but there's some numbers to verify that what I'm talking about is actually a thing. Maker fairs. I had the privilege of working for a company up until about a year ago that ran a magazine called Make Magazine and was chiefly in charge of directing maker fairs globally. The maker fairs started about 10 years ago, starting in my home area of the Bay Area in California. And then they've quickly exploded out to over 120 maker fair events each year worldwide. And part of my weekly show that I do, every week I mention the 3 or 4 fairs that are happening that weekend, just to bring awareness to the fact that this is something that's always happening any given weekend in the world. There's a maker fair. In addition to these, just to paint the whole picture, there is an outpouring now of do-it-yourself online content on sites like Instructables. YouTube has a huge do-it-yourself video presence. Sites like Hackaday, Reddit. There's this huge contributed pool of knowledge out there online. There is a rapid emergence of short-run products on places like Kickstarter or Tindy or Etsy. The idea that you can, no longer is it the case that if you have a great idea that you think you could bring to market, that you have to sell it to a Samsung or a GE. That is something that you can do on your own. This is also part of the everything we're seeing around us now that is contributing to this maker movement taking place. We're seeing community libraries and nonprofits advertising maker spaces or fab labs for public use for people to get access to tools that they might not have at home. In addition to that, there are these new breeds of tools that are digitally controlled tools like 3D printers, CNC routers and mills, laser cutters that bring the ability to create things to people who might otherwise be scared of working with conventional woodshop tools or metalworking tools. And also, I think in addition to this, I saw this a lot when I was working at CNET. There is a movement of people who, when their gadgets break, when their phones drop on the ground or in the toilet, they instead of just throwing it away and buying a new one, there is now a sense of empowerment that you could try, even if you might screw up your phone even more, you could try to go out and repair your gadgets and appliances. There are sites like iFixit now that have an amazing selection of guides for how to replace screens on your laptop, screens on your phone, buy new cameras and parts to replace the stuff that you have. But this isn't new. Some of this isn't new. I'm confronted with this a lot. A lot of times when people are reluctant to acknowledge that this maker movement is a thing, it's like, well, people have always been making stuff, right? And it's true. The capacity to make things and to invent things has been with us for a long time. Really, if there's a new idea out there, the idea of living a full, complete life just buying the things you need is really only been with us for a very short amount of time, right? But for the most part, inventiveness and making of things is not a new or novel chapter in being a human being. America in particular has a long tradition of inventing and making, and if you think of a lot of our favorite characters in American history, our forefathers, thinking of Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, the Wright brothers, we have, as Americans, woven into our own stories of how we think of ourselves as Americans, a tradition of inventing and creating and being, coming up with ingenious solutions to things. The magazine I was working for, Make Magazine in particular, is a hearkening back to what was so great about the tradition of Popular Mechanics and pop sci magazines. I feel like as someone who sees a lot of garage sales and goes out to a lot of yard sales, almost every other yard sale I feel like I find Granddad's stack of Popular Mechanics magazines available. And I love leafing through those, and you always see ads for learning machining and learning television repair and not VCR repair, maybe later, but radio repair. And this is Popular Mechanics and the history of people being interested in fields and advancements in technology that are beyond their own skill set and their own experience. That's something that's been with us for a long time. I feel like this, most recently in like the post-World War II era, there was also, I think, this promise that we made to returning GIs that they would come back and they would have a garage where they could fix things and make things, and this idea that we would spend our leisure time as men fixing things in our garage and making things, and we'd find these magazines with recipes for making go-karts for our kids or making backyard furniture that we'd be able to make use of. This was very much a part of our history that, for reasons that even escape me, that really feel like it was put on the back burner for a long time. Maybe they just kind of got old. I'm going to take a breath here. I remember growing up in the 80s and being exposed to woodcraft and to electronics projects, the Radio Shack kind of 101 inventions kind of kits, and seeing them as something kind of old and dusty, and not necessarily being able to connect it to the things I was excited about, the Nintendos and the early Apple II computers and the things that were of my time. And I feel like what has changed, and maybe this is a good segue into the next slide, is that technology became accessible as something that you could pick up and play with. And not just black boxes that you weren't supposed to get into, but things that you could actually tinker with and take on as your own, the same way that you could take on, and was probably exciting for a generation to take on wood and metals and the Popular Mechanics type of elements that were of that generation. So the technology part of this is new. And the internet part of this, the learning of it, is new too. How many people in this room have fixed something or done something that was outside of your skill set because you were able to look up how to do it online? Maybe it was a YouTube video, thank you. Maybe it was just Googling it and finding a guide to do it. It is something that I reflect on a lot, how powerful that is. That with our phones, at any given point, you can come up against the limits of your knowledge and instantly be able to find a way out of it. And God bless this library, but there was a time when, if you came up to the limit of your knowledge, I hope you would find yourself here looking for a book. You would find yourself looking for an expert in your community. You'd find yourself going to the encyclopedia. But for the most part, you would have to stop what you're doing and go scramble for a while to figure out what the next step would be. Now, I instinctually look up stuff on YouTube just to figure out how to cook a meal or how to fix a light switch in my home. Got a lot of home repair stuff recently that I've been looking lots of things up on YouTube. But this is amazing, and it is a huge and quiet shift away from the way we used to do things. It also creates an interesting side effect. Maybe this is just me personally, but I feel like once you've solved problems so quickly that you come up against just using your phone or using someone else's document on how they fixed a light switch, you realize that there's a lot of things that you could probably look up and learn and figure out how to do. And that the momentum of solving problems using digital content can become infectious. And can inspire you to take on things you might otherwise not think to take on. This is a screenshot I took just a few days ago from a site called Instructables. And it is a catalog of do-it-yourself projects that can run the entire gamut. I have a friend who works for Instructables actually, and her favorite thing to do is to come up with off-brand Frappuccino recipes and desserts that she posts on Instructables. But it could also be computer projects. It could be, I'm really interested in doing this wooden go-kart one up over here. That looks like a lot of fun to me. But there's a huge swath of different projects that are posted every day from people, not by professional writers, contributed out to the internet. And the reason I can do my weekly show is because the fire hose of new projects that are coming to this site every single week is so vast, and the quantity is so much that I can just spend my week picking out my favorite ones and talking about them, and that's enough to sustain me every week. But it's impressive. But this idea that you can explore different areas that you might not otherwise do without having to take a 101 course, without having to take an introductory course. If you want to learn how to work an electron microscope, you could probably find an online guide to do that now. In fact, you could probably find several online guides and video tutorials and pick from your favorite that resonates best with you and go and tackle that challenge that would previously have taken you into a college lecture hall in order to have some idea of what you're doing. All right, so this idea of the instant frictionless access to shared knowledge across a huge range of subject matters is new. And it's revealed that there are a lot of us out there who want to know how to do things on our own and create things for ourselves. To that point, let's talk about the beginnings of what has brought us here. This is a shot of the MIT Center for Bits and Atoms Fab Lab. In 2002, a professor at MIT named Neil Gershenfeld created a class called How to Make Almost Anything. And it was his response to having a lot of students come through MIT, engineering students in particular, that had a lot of theory and a lot of knowledge, our country's most brilliant people being fed through MIT, but they didn't have a lot of hands-on time with tools, practical tools, or much less a lot of the new and most interesting laser cutters and computer-controlled machinery that was just kind of hot and new in this era. So he wanted a place where he could teach his students how to work with tools and actually make things in real life, and also open it up to all of the students at MIT. That was another very important idea. He didn't just make the lab and the course accessible to engineering students. He opened it up to architecture students, artists, anyone who wanted to learn how to use the tools and to help them make the things that they were passionate about. The class was wildly popular against all expectations, and there are over 600 Fab Lab facilities that are directly descended from this initial MIT Fab Lab that are around the world globally. And I think there's even been the push, or there has been one here in Iowa City that may be on its way back too. But it was a fundamental idea that really was help in forming this idea of the maker movement, and also this idea that it's open to everybody. In fact, some of the most interesting ideas come when engineers are around artists and artists are around engineers. It's one of the things that has been said of the maker fairs is that they're a place where engineers come to show off their art projects and artists come to show off their engineering projects. It's that the interdisciplinary kind of feeding off of each other that is the secret sauce of what makes maker fairs such an interesting hive of different types of people and professions. So that was 2002 when that started. 2005, this magazine called Make Magazine started hitting the shelves, created by Dale Doherty. And it was a real turning point for me as a writer and at the time, as someone who worked at a bookstore. I remember when these issues started hitting the newsstands, and I would grab them and read them, and totally gravitated towards this. A year after the magazine came out, they created a Maker Faire, the first ever Maker Faire in around 2006. And initially, it was just a place for fans of the magazine to gather and show off what they made, their favorite projects. And it was a steam model railroad builders club. It was the R2D2 builders club. It was kind of a science fair meets Burning Man arts and sculpture demonstration. And it was initially really just a playground for adults. Not until subsequent years did it become absolutely a place for families to bring their children and expose them to all the different kinds of creative ways that you can express yourself. And now I think about 50% of attendees at any of the two flagship Maker Fairs, they are bringing children. The two flagship fairs take place in San Mateo in New York, and they have a combined combination of about 215,000 people who come through both fairs. Just those two out of the 120 worldwide fairs. The global events reach an unexpected array of destinations. They're in Cairo, Hong Kong, Tokyo, New Delhi, Turkey, Nepal, a lot of places. And if you haven't been to one, it's kind of part state fair, part science fair, part arts fair, and they're really an opportunity to show off the best of what that local community is making. They're not. It's not a traveling show in the sense that the same things and kiosks go from state to state. They're really just a presentation of what's happening locally in your community. On that note, what would you find in a Maker Faire? I'm glad you asked, Donald. You would find blacksmiths, you'd find steam-powered model railroads, kinetic sculptures, fire arts, Power Wheels Racing League, R2D2 Builders Club, DIY electric vehicle conversions, steampunk art cars, life-size robot giraffes, compressed air rocket launchers, Aerial Sports League, which races do-it-yourself drones, and they compete in like these little netted areas. Local crafts, vendors of amateur electronics, manufacturers of 3D printers, lots of fun, cool stuff. All right. I also want to talk a little bit about the democratization of technology, because that's something that's been happening in parallel to this whole thing, and is part of what is unique to, I feel, this do-it-yourself renaissance right now, is that the technology has gotten really cheap and approachable. This is the artistic rendering of the Arduino hardware platform. This actually shows you some actual different flavors of the Arduino. This is a $25 microcontroller board that was designed by a group of Italian art and design professors. They wanted a way for their students to be able to create interactive projects within one semester without having to learn electronics or having to learn the basics of breadboarding, the stuff that becomes the stumbling blocks and can be kind of dry if what you're wanting to do is just make an interactive museum exhibit or some piece of interactive design. And by interactive, I simply mean anything that requires input from like a button press or can detect you approaching it, something that is not simply a static sculpture but responds to your presence. So in order to do that, they created this microcontroller platform called Arduino I want to say around 2004, 2005. And it was an explosive hit, way beyond the realm of art and design students. It just became a platform for people to create interactive projects and be able to share that technology and the code behind it in a forum and across users that also wanted to replicate those projects and designs. And this really became a foothold for the maker movement, where instead of having to spend a long time understanding electronics and breadboarding and components and soldering and all of that, you could replicate someone's recipe for an Arduino project, buy the board and a handful of electronics components, and upload the existing code, not even having to learn coding yourself, but take someone else's code, send it over to this board with your computer, and have the project work in much the same way that it was designed from the original designer. I'd say easily 25% of most of the projects I see at a given maker fair are based on Arduino. It's a platform that's been around now for about 10 years, but it is still a very prevalent and powerful platform, if for no other reason than the breadth of people who've contributed interesting projects to it and shared them with each other it's had so much momentum that it keeps carrying forward. And a lot of people get scared off by the idea that making somehow necessarily involves working with technology. And like I said at the beginning, you don't have to be someone who's comfortable with technology in order to consider yourself part of the maker movement. By all means, there's a lot of crafters and woodworkers and people who have been honing ancient techniques of metalworking, who are absolutely part of this. That said, technology has really been the catalyst for our excitement around this taking another look at the do-it-yourself movement, and has really created new avenues for people to get excited about making things, and has allowed people to really reshape what it means to work with electronics and to work with code and to make projects and products that were previously really hard to imagine you doing on your own. I also want to say that even people who've been reluctant to get on board with technology, I've seen a lot of woodworkers and craftsmen come around to the benefits of expanding their idea of how technology can work with their given discipline, because there's been a lot of interesting ways that computer-controlled equipment and technologies have made things easier for them or allowed them to take on projects that they wouldn't have been able to take on before. Yeah, technology is a part of this, whether we like it or not. And I feel like, again, common to what every maker has in their wanting to make a thing in the world, technology has allowed people to, at some point, you're going to dream big enough where the solution for what you want to make involves technology. And the good news is it's cheaper than ever and it's more accessible than ever. Talked about Arduino. Another cornerstone of maker technology is the Raspberry Pi computer board. This is a $35 computer platform. It is a full Linux-based computer that when you boot up, it boots up and it shows you, if you connect a screen and a keyboard and a mouse to it, it behaves just like any conventional computer would. You get a desktop, you can connect to the internet, you can browse the web. And it also comes with an array of different software where you can learn coding, you can play around with different projects and ideas. And like Arduino, there is a huge community of people who've contributed projects and code and examples that you can learn from and base your own project ideas off of. Now the weird little rat's nest down here, that's a Raspberry Pi board in the background here, and a Tupperware tub, the little rat's nest of wires. This is a project that someone did in order to control their irrigation system for their garden. And the reason I included it here is because I feel like one of the most important points of the Raspberry Pi is not that it's a fast computer, it's not that it is an easy to understand computer necessarily, it is that it's a $35 computer. And when something is that inexpensive, you can apply it to projects that you might not otherwise want to apply your $1,000 or so laptop to, right? So this person's going to take their $35 investment, they're going to put it in a Tupperware container with a few wires, and they're going to put it out in their garden and see how well that project works to help irrigate their, I don't know, clover or whatever they might be growing in their garden. And when the price comes down that low, when the technology is that inexpensive and accessible, you can see it as a solution to problems that you might otherwise apply to computers. I've seen Raspberry Pis used in weather balloon projects. I've seen them used in underwater projects like this. I've seen them used in car projects, actually. I've seen them used for monitoring engine health. A lot of different ways you can apply this board to different problems in your life and get pretty creative with it. And again, this has been something that has been this idea of inexpensive technology, accessible technology, enabling things you couldn't do before. It's been part of several movements beyond the maker movement. I think about how in the 50s and 60s, how much car culture flipped from the idea of the car being a black box that if it broke down you'd take to a mechanic, into hot rod culture, where it was absolutely understood that you could tweak your car, you could tweak its performance, you could repair a part, you could upgrade a part, you could get third-party parts and fit it into your car. Also, I personally, as a musician, I remember the first time I got my hands on a 4-track recorder, and I could use that to record little demos in my room. But previous to the advent of being able to have a home studio and do home recording as a musician, the idea was that if you got good enough as a musician, you would get signed to a record label. They'd book you time in a very expensive studio, and then the studio is how you'd make music. But nowadays, everyone understands that you can have home studio equipment inexpensively. This MacBook comes with like home recording software built into it now. And it's everywhere. There's entire genres of music that only exist because the access to inexpensive recording technology became something lowered the barrier of entry for as many people as they could take on to be able to play around with music and not think of it as a gilded thing that could only happen in studios. I'm rounding the corner here. So if you want to be a part of this movement, if you want to be a card-carrying maker, there's, like I said, it's a meritocracy of creativity. There's really nothing you have to do or buy in order to do that. There's no college course to take. This is my recipe for you. If you can find a local maker fair, or if it's an off-brand maker fair, maybe they'll call it a making fair or something like that. You can go out there and expose yourself to different ways people are being creative around technology or being creative around arts and crafts. Find something that lights you up that you want to take on. Get excited for the thing that you want to make, and then proceed knowing that YouTube and Google and Instructables, and there's a whole world of online forums and advice and instruction out there for you to do the thing you want to do and to catch you there when you fall and provide guidance for you. And if you are lacking in space, I know for the longest time, especially in the Bay Area, the idea of the luxury of being able to have a garage or a place to actually do the making that wouldn't upset my wife or my roommates was really hard. But there are now a growing number of maker spaces and fab labs that allow you access to tools and oftentimes will provide you with an education on how to use the tools, oftentimes sort of community colleges, or even finding a friend that knows the thing that you want to do and can teach you. I've traded 6 packs of beer for many lessons in welding and electronics and things that are outside of my own skill set, and those have always worked out well for me. If you do want to buy a book, though, even though this gentleman did eventually fire me from my job at Make Magazine, I really do recommend this book, Free to Make by Dale Dougherty. It is an excellent, comprehensive guide to what the maker movement has been, how it affects everything that we're doing, how it's affecting education, which is a big passionate thing of his, and how it's affecting local governments and rebuilding fabrication in this country. It's everything you'd want to know and more about the maker movement. I highly recommend it. And that, I think, brings me to the end of my presentation, but I am happy to take on questions. This is my email. If you have any follow-up questions you don't want to ask me in front of other people, you can send me an email. And this is my business, my blog, and YouTube channel, Maker Project Lab. And I have some stickers up here that you're free to take too. But I'd love to answer some questions.
What was the last project that you did?
Oh.
On the mic.
What was the last project that you did?
The last project I did. I'll tell you my last project I did and my ongoing project right now. My last project I did was I used a Raspberry Pi computer board, the $35 computer that I talked about, to make a home server for my old MP3 collection, because I found that my phone, as much as I love that this thing came into my life and could hold some music for me, my phone is really its most important function for storage is storing photos of my kid and my family, and that the years I invested in buying MP3s and music is now something that I don't store on here anymore because the storage is so precious for other things. But I had this huge collection of MP3s that I just had on hard drives. I didn't actually have the ability to access them, so I made a home music player so that I could have like kind of a jukebox in my home connected up to a speaker that could hold my music collection. And there was some software available that I had to do very little to in order to get it up and running that would show me a list on the web browser, on my phone, my list of my music collection, so I could just queue it up on my phone and have it start playing on my speaker. It's been fun. It's been one of the few projects I've done that my wife is actually allowed in the house without it being a sore subject. So she actually likes that we have this new computer-controlled jukebox in our home. That was my last project that I finished and I'm proud of. My ongoing project is I'm building an electric go-kart to race at the upcoming Maker Faire. There's a series called the Power Racing Series. Try to slide back here. I even showed it a little bit. That grown men and women modify Power Wheels kids' cars and soup them up to go about 20 miles per hour through a course, all electric technology. And it seems like a silly thing, but there are teams from MIT that compete in this every year. And it's actually a really interesting community to be a part of, and I wanted to be a part of it. It's this great mishmash of total irreverence and also really interesting learning experiences. I'm using 4 Leaf cell batteries, which are batteries that were ripped out of a Nissan Leaf electric car that are powering my little Hello Kitty car that I'm building right now. And it's taking me about a year to really figure out all the steps involved in this, from welding, steering linkages, considerations around power, a lot of things that are totally out of my comfort zone. But again, like this, knowing that even big projects like this, if I come up against them and hit a wall, that there's an online resource for me or a friend I can reach out to, has made this possible for me. Again, this is something where I had no practical experience working with go-karts or designing cars, but it's an exciting project for me to sink my teeth into. Yes? Sorry, microphone's coming.
What's your favorite rapid prototyping material?
Good question. I like working with, I've enjoyed working with foam core as an inexpensive material for taking a box cut or two and taping up and coming up with ideas. One thing that I've designed several different times, this sounds weird. I'm in a band of old dudes, and we're an instrumental band, and without a lead singer, we have a lot of shtick. And as part of that shtick, we have a box that we call the rock box that's about half the height of this table, and it has LEDs in it. When you jump on it, lights come up. And it's just part of the stage show. But I've designed about 4 different versions of this box now. And I've designed versions that can pack flat and like I can actually get them in the duffel bag to tour with if we ever want to fly somewhere and do something. I've designed versions that have fallen apart, frankly, and have not held up to our weight and probably almost caused us serious harm. But I've mostly have prototyped those in foam core. I just like it as a inexpensive but still stiff material to work with.
If you think about what you've been describing for the maker movement and linking it up with earlier movements like hacker culture or DIY culture, do you think there's any kind of political dimension to the maker movement, like as a response to consumer ideology?
Personally, yes, I do. And this is, I think if you asked different people, they'd all have different responses. But I feel like as a kid, my experience growing up was not one where tools were often thrust in front of me. I remember taking a woodshop course in middle school, and as much as I enjoyed it, and I still have like the little wooden tool tote that I made from that class, there was also this sense that there was the kids who took woodshop or machine shop and that were somehow destined to maybe do blue-collar work, fabrication work, that weren't on the college prep course. There was the kids who could work with their hands, and then there was the college prep kids and the GATE kids who were going to go on to what would eventually be Google. But those were 2 different tracks. And for me, what I've come around to, and I feel like which is where we are now, is this idea that taking the stigma out of this idea that working with your hands and understanding tools is somehow against the notion of you being able to be a useful member of the workforce we need right now. And I think that being able to do prototyping, being able to troubleshoot computing platforms, being able to marry up together both code and robotics or the real world, to be able to know how to do prototyping, 3D prototyping that can get 3D printed or fabricated elsewhere. Those are all skills that we absolutely need in the 21st century. And I think that there is, in that way, something political or sociological in the maker movement shaping our ways of thinking about what skills we need. I don't know if that gets to your question at all.
So I want to hear your perspective on stuff that I deal with a lot, and seeing that schools are trying to embrace this maker movement and they're creating maker spaces. But then what I run into is that they don't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
And so they have all this great stuff, but they don't know how to use it. So do you have any guidance or just your perspective on that and how they can embrace it more and actually get all of it they can out of it?
Yeah. I don't have a lot of experience with it. I think there's probably a presenter who could probably speak to that better than I could. I mean, not here, but just in general. There's a better person to answer that question. But I do feel like in my own experience with both being a parent and also seeing the school environment, so much of it comes down to the project and the appeal of the project. And for myself personally, like I think the reason why electronics missed with me for so long when I was growing up, is just because the end result just seemed so not worth the time. It wasn't exciting to me. I think for better or for worse, different kids are excited about different aspects of different projects. I think it's hard to get everyone on board with the same enthusiasm to tackle whatever the given thing is. Like you could, to hear Dale's take on it, the idea of self-directed learning and taking on projects either individually or in groups is important, but most of all, that the idea of what you want to accomplish in that space is one that you are invested in and have kind of set out for yourself from the outset is really important. I think this idea that you present a project that's magically going to get all kids on board out from the outset is a really hard thing to nail down. But if it's coming from the student forward, I think it's a lot easier for them to buy into it and to keep that self-directed learning, going through. But I'm excited to see what happens. I hope that there's a good answer out there for you, better than that one.
Yeah, and just to add to that, some themes that I've seen repeated throughout the day, like technology is not the destination, is one of them that I think has come up through a lot of the talks. It's just something that can help them get there, but they still have to see. And I think, unfortunately, for some educators, they're being sort of pressured to have access to this technology because technology is the thing that people see as being the goal, but it's not really the goal, right? It's just a tool to get to the goal. And there were other points that I'm now forgetting. We also wanted to mention we do have a copy of Free to Make in the library. Somebody has it right now, but you could certainly put it on hold if you wanted to and get a hold of it in the future. Oh, the other thing I was going to say, I think one other part of that I think about a lot in myself and reflecting upon maybe some of the valuable lessons I learned from my parents, although they aren't super techies or anything, is this sense of this sort of hacker aesthetic, so to speak, in that there aren't really impossible things. There are just harder and easier things. And most problems you can take and just chip away at and get a little bit closer. And the end thing that you get to might not be the thing that you imagined originally, but it doesn't mean that you can't somehow get a little bit closer and a little bit closer until you have a solution. And that a solution might not be, again, the destination might not be what you originally thought it was. And it probably isn't just the technology, but imparting in people that it is possible to just chip away and make a little bit of progress and get closer and closer and iterate is, I think, really valuable. And the other thing too is, the number of people that raised their hand when he said, who's looked at a YouTube video and fixed things. Well, guess what? All of you are already makers if you said yes, right? And I think some people just are reticent to self-identify in that way, but I mean, it doesn't take that much to be someone who is engaging with things in this way instead of being someone who's purely consuming, right?
Going over here.
With the sort of democratization of information, and do you think that there can be a problem with sort of a paralysis of too many options? The reason that I mention that is because we were looking at 3D printing, and you can model your object in SketchUp, or you can model your object in this and then convert it through these other 4 programs. Yeah. There are 50 different systems that you can start with, and it's which do I want to program it in Java? Do I want to program it in Robot C? Do I want to program it in Python? If I'm starting from nowhere, how do you decide which of these 50 options you would use to get to your end product?
Yeah, absolutely. There is the paradox of choice of a lot of these different platforms and options, and but ultimately, I think what's great about it is that coming down to the bad teacher metaphor for me, it's I again, coming as someone who came to engineering through an English degree, the thing that has been most important to me has been seeing the same thing explained 10 different ways is something that we get to have now that we didn't have before. And I have, most recently, I was troubleshooting a drawing machine, this thing called the MakeBlock XY plotter. And it's made by a Chinese company that makes a lot of do-it-yourself kits. This particular one was just, it had been around for maybe 5 years, and they came out with the kit, and then a year later they came out with a software upgrade. And the software upgrade only worked with some computers. And then the community came up with another tool that patched the software for different computers. And then another group of people came up with an HTML version of the software that worked on a different set of computers. And for me to troubleshoot this printer and figure out why it wasn't working for me involved probably 4 days of me going to different forums and finding all of the different solutions that people had come up with that worked for them at the end of this forum, these different branches. And none of them had actually been synthesized into like a single place. So it's this huge branching. And once you solve this problem, like you pretty much give up on the chase, right? And that's, unless anyone's coming back around to collect all of the interesting solutions for it, there just becomes all these different ways you have to figure out how to solve this problem. Maybe the problem is, how do I come up with what's the easiest way for me to get into 3D printing that's the best combination of software and reliable hardware, right? It sounds like an easy question, and there's going to be a million different answers for you, right? But I think you just have to find the community maybe that resonates best for you, or the manufacturer that resonates best for you, even if it's just like a vibe for like you liking the way that they do things, and taking that avenue is the one that you hope is going to pan out for you. And I swear, for a lot of these platforms, try to figure out what their support system is like. Because this one, I just recently got around with like this bad experience with MakeBlock, where it's like you could not email somebody on their team for the life of you. There's no way you're going to contact them. But there are small little places like there's a startup actually in California, a company called Printerbot that makes 3D printers out of Northern California, and it's like a team of a few dozen people that make them, and they're solid machines, and like if you email them, they're going to email right back to you and tell you exactly what to do, and they'll figure out which platform you're on, what the best solution is. So maybe that's the takeaway, is instead of looking for the flashy things, find out what has the best system of support for you, and plow forward that way.
Yeah, for me, it's often like this process of triangulation or something. You find 3 or 4 options, and you see, between seeing, being able to have that compare and contrast between them, you're like, oh, well, this part of that one really resonates with me or is nearer to what I already know, but this part of this other one is nearer to this other thing, or maybe it's a better price point or whatever it might be, and you just kind of figure out which of those things you're most valuing at this time, and then just go for it, hope for the best.
And another thing from especially the student perspective is that, especially in this area, there are a lot of STEM camps that do 3D printing. And so maybe a way to kind of try it before you buy it would be to do a camp on 3D printing and see what they use, and find the person teaching it that could be your local resource, and that they might have recommendations on, oh yeah, we went to this because this didn't work, that kind of stuff.
I'll also say that I think that we're going to quickly come up to a future where we realize that this exact process of being overwhelmed with options and sifting through them is actually a skill in of itself worth teaching somehow. Because I've found that for me, I have undertaken research projects like that would have scared the hell out of me years ago. But now I've gotten through enough of things like that, of researching my way through figuring out how to make a piece of software work or a piece of code work on a Raspberry Pi that was totally out of my comfort zone, and I've gotten through the other end of it and felt like that's something that you can get to the other side of it, but they can get scarier. You can fall down deeper rabbit holes, but knowing that you can get through to the other side of that is, I feel like, a skill that is going to be useful in the long term.
So I think at that we should probably wrap so that people can get on with their evenings. Can everybody please join me in thanking Donald?